Welcome to Voices Less Heard with Dr. PMak. And this show is just a series of conversations that I'm having with, what I'll call ordinary people doing extraordinary work, right? So I'm really, really excited to have you here to just not only speak about the work that you're doing, and in particular, in fact, just to lay it up, over the past couple of months, I've been thinking about young people and trades and the work that they're growing into, right? Like, post-secondary school, what are kids gonna be? I'm thinking about my kids, like, with a daughter who will not say her age because she'll be like, Dad, how could you? But, just thinking about, options and careers and trades, and you came up, right? Your name came up in my head. I was like, oh yeah, Uncle Mike is working on this. And so welcome to this podcast.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
As your introduction is gone, I've spoken about your entrepreneurial, experience, the work that you've done within Millwork, and so I wanted to just start you off with perhaps, something that might be uncomfortable but comfortable. What are you bad at?
Oh, what am I bad at? So much, Patrick, so much. Actually, believe it or not, I'm not the best at communicating. Like
oh, really?
when I were to like break it all down, I'm not the best communicator because I get too passionate about things, right? And then I get clouded by that. So that's one of the things that I struggle with. And so tools, I have to count on my tools to keep me organized and that kind of stuff. Like I'm bad at things like music. I never was gifted at things like music. Like someone gave me a ukulele and they're like, hey, here, play this to like save your life. Not a chance.
But was it last year or the year before you hosted a music show at your house?
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
Were you playing?
No. This is just it. I'm good at putting things together.
Okay.
And I'm very good at networking with folks. And I love music because it speaks to me. I grew up with it. And so, I do have a passion for it, but I'm just not inclined in terms of skill. So that's always been a struggle of mine. I wish that, I'm so good at so many things, but then there's a few things where it's just like no hope whatsoever.
Well, that's interesting. And so I want to go back into sort of your experience, right? So I grew up in Harare, Zimbabwe, so many miles and hours away from this place. And my father was really, really passionate about education, right? He was like, you got to go into school, you got to get educated, and that's how you got to make money and pay your bills, right? And for the longest of time, for me, it's like, okay, I'm going to take this educational route or academic route and get as skilled as possible or academically skilled as possible. And then I got to an age, I think in my early 20s, as I started, being more entrepreneurial, I was like, I would have perhaps preferred a different route. I would have perhaps gone more for trades and skills, right? So for me, one of my passions is gardening. I really, really love gardening. And at some point in my life, I did own a landscaping company. Cool. And for me, that was like tangible, something that I could do. What got you started?
Yeah, well, that's just it. Is like, so for me, academia, just in general, was never my cup of tea. So like, all through middle school, grade school, I was not the, kid excelling at doing homework and stuff like that. So very much like, and even when we speak about like the Canadian system in general, especially where we were in Southern Ontario, the system wasn't built for kids like me that were just distracted in everyday life. I didn't excel at things like English and science and stuff. So I immediately was drawn to all those classes in school that were things like technology, design, shop class. My high school shop class, I say regularly that my teacher from high school shop class, Mr. Brown, shout out to Mr. Brown.
There you go.
I believe he may have saved my life in the sense that he spoke into my life at a time when I was so eager to go opposite directions.
Wow.
And he was a cabinet maker by trade who had gotten back into teaching and was now teaching at a high school level and just really taught me what it was to be passionate about a trade. And so that was kind of like my real entry into the trades and technology sector. But I think that I've always had sort of a keen eye for detail. And I come from parents that, were hardworking. My dad never left his job. So a lot of like things like my devotion, I think I get from just his steadfast, he was a letter carrier for Canada Post for 35 straight years. And, so he taught me principles of work that come with the practice of a trade. And so that was kind of like where I got into it. And more than anything, I just felt like there was always some external force. And really, we'll probably get into more of that. But really, the reality is I've always just believed that I was made to make things.
Wow. So just, right off the bat, like, as you go into school, academia is not for me, but I can do trades. Now, do you see that you move to today and the work that you're doing with Skills Canada, do you see that schools are encouraging young kids to go into trades more, or it's still going the academic route?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's been a huge shift, especially more recent years, especially even since the pandemic. You've seen a big pendulum shift towards the trades. We're getting a lot more funding for things. We're getting a lot more just like calls for people that are looking for more specialized training and staff. There's just a broader net that's being cast, I think. Now, that being said, even going back to my high school days, there was still support, but again, it was always on a very individual level. And actually, speaking to your podcast and the theme that we're talking about today, that almost has always been echoed. Is that you get a lot of one-on-one training, a lot of small business training, a lot of like the little, connections. Whereas now that I develop into my career, I'm starting to learn that the bigger connections are really going to make legacy. They're going to build differences and things like that. And so
that's interesting. Let me take you again. So you finish high school and you've run successful businesses. What were the steps? So after school, what was the
I should point out that I was a high school dropout. And so that's one thing that I want to stick a pin in. And so like I got to that point where I was, so this is really my story. Is that, and I think that this actually speaks to a lot of tradespeople, is that there's a point in time where a switch gets flipped in your head and you start to think, okay, I can actually visualize myself doing these things. And so actually what happened for me is I was doing so well in my tech classes in high school that I was failing everything else.
Wow.
And so the vice principal, again, back to like having those individual connection points, is the vice principal witnessed what I was doing in tech. And he pulled me aside. He said, Mike, the school has to expel you.
Oh, wow.
But I see what you're doing. If you just like, maybe here's what. Drop out this semester.
So
we'll restart you.
So having to expel you was based on you not attending class and
me just not attending the other classes. That's right. Okay. And so it was like I was just not doing well in anything except the tech. And so he's like, well, we've got you doing so much stuff for the school. I don't want to lose you. But come back next semester. And we'll instead of expelling you, drop out now. And so I think there's a lot of to be said about what I learned in that moment in my career. And that is bringing the problem to the table to all the parties involved. And that's for tradespeople just in general. I would say that that's the best skill that they can learn at a young age, is understanding that they have to be able to collaborate even when they're being told that like there is no hope. Right. And so, and laying it out there. And so I returned and we did well, and I graduated high school, and then I carried on from there. I studied post-secondary school. I studied at the Woodworking Center of Ontario, which was awesome. And my time there was really well spent, because as a mature student at that point, I had taken a couple years off after high school, and I went back, really decided that I wanted to study woodworking. And so having that sort of mature approach really gave me an advantage of my other colleagues in school, which landed me better, co-op placements and better career aspirations.
And then setting up a business, was that something that you thought up when you were still in design school?
Well, yes.
Did that come about?
Yeah, it did. So actually a buddy of mine and I from school started our first business together, not during school, but actually what happened in 2009 with what was in, the recession of 2009, we were both working at the time for other people. And the owners of the company that I was working for actually came to me again in a very like heart to heart moment of saying, hey, we're up against a wall. You're a luxury. And we sort of look at the next round of layoffs. You might want to think about finding another job. And so they extended me that olive branch, which I really appreciated. And so I called my friend Dave at the time. And I said, man, we've talked about it. What about now? And so we literally took a pickup truck full of tools into downtown Toronto. And that was sort of how we cut our teeth starting our first business. You know, we were co-op members at a shop. It was Toronto's oldest woodworking co-op. You know, we rented a tiny little 200 square foot space in the corner, and it was hard. Like, it was really hard. I think our first on the books project I can remember to this day was it was a small piece of Spanish cedar trim.
Oh, wow.
And the only reason why we got the job is
that sounds complicated for first.
It sounds complicated, but the only reason why we got it is because I just randomly happened to buy like a truck cap off the guy that was looking for it. And I just randomly happened to have one random piece of Spanish cedar sitting in the shop that I could make this piece of molding with. So it was like a complete, what I would believe now in, you know, in retrospect, be a moment that I imagine God placed in my life to create an opportunity.
So you bring God in, you're a person of faith, right?
I am indeed.
And so what role is faith played in your life, particularly in setting up the business?
Yeah, well, a huge role for me. I mean, really, back then, I guess I would say that I dreamt of being maybe the man I am today. I don't know what that was, but I do think that having prescribed to a faith early in my life, and even just following by that faith, you know, a regular committed Sunday worship service, and some of those just practices that allowed me to maintain healthy habits throughout my adult life. And so that was like a big one for me. The other one that started to be really evident as my business started to unfold is that I really started to understand that God calls all of us in different ways. You know, being someone who could never excel academically, I had to kind of really wrestle with the competitiveness of downtown Toronto, you know, the competitiveness of being an entrepreneur. You know, other entrepreneurs I was rubbing shoulders with had MBAs and things like that. And it really struck a chord with my identity. And so my faith really came into play when I started to realize that God had created me to do what I'm doing.
Wow. I love hearing that, right? That the qualification is not so much the academic qualification, but what God has called you to do. So God has qualified you to do what you're doing, right?
Absolutely, man.
And one of the things that I read about, and I can't remember the book right now, was that God didn't give us tables and chairs and all these beautiful custom-made furniture. God gave us trees and said, okay, go figure it out.
That's right.
So that's your calling, to figure out what needs to be done.
That's right. And more than anything, I think what it comes down to is everyone has something that, you know, I believe that everyone has something that they excel at, you know, back to what I was saying, like, I'm not gifted at music. There's musicians that I confidently, I mean, it would be almost no one on earth could disagree with. There's people out there that have been God gifted the ability to sing or, you know, play music. And so I really think that when we break our lives down to our talents, God awards us with different sets. And so, you know, when you start to look at how God makes those areas blessed and how those things end up being, you know, they almost unfold naturally. And they're the things you're passionate about that you don't understand where the passion comes from.
Okay, so let's talk about, you know, the role of faith in business then. We live in a world where folks will be like, well, you're Christian, I don't want to work with you. Or you believe in God, I don't believe in anything. So we're not. How is that worked for you? Have you secured business because of your faith? Have you lost business because of your faith? What experience have you had over the years?
I definitely think that I've both won and lost business because of my faith. I mean, it's fair to say that the North American Evangelical Christian Network is a wealthy one and worth you know, the business investment to do business with. I think that there's, for starters, even believing that the fact that there's nothing wrong with doing business at church or with the people that you commune with at church is a hurdle that I even had to get over a little bit. Understanding that really everything I have is God's. Understanding that the success that we have as a business is really a reflection of how God's moving in our lives. And then not only that, also understanding how we can navigate loving the people that think that just because I carry a personal faith, the work I'm doing is not going to suffice their problems, right? So this is like the one hurdle I've had to get past. And I mean, we do try to stay cutting edge and current. And to be honest, I'm not hammering down the door of people saying, hey, in order to buy something we've designed, you need to accept the reality that we believe in God. And so that's always been a thing. But I definitely have had people resistant to working with us, and
now have you approached that? Like when people just shut you out because of that, is that easy to walk away from that, business? Like,
it's funny because I think that former self, and I've run now I say many, but I mean really a handful of different companies over the years. And so what I keep coming back to is that the work, if you focus on the work, and less about, the personal elements that you're interweaving into the work, allow the project to call the shots. Then oftentimes people can understand that your passion lies where your passion lies. And then they're able to pick it up and understand how it relates to the project. And so I think that, the resistance we've felt it's the same resistance any entrepreneur feels. That's the reality, is that resistance is the first law of stepping out in any endeavor.
True. So I want to go back. Earlier on, you spoke about your dad and his influence on your life and what you did. And then you said that, you alluded to that, he taught you a few principles of how to do business. What principles were those? And I know one of the things that you always tout, even in our conversations over coffee, is, the importance of integrity in doing business. What other principles did you pick up from back then that you continue to use now?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, the integrity is such an important one. Being in business and even just approaching deals, deal by deal, approaching it with honesty. My father was always a pretty honest man to a fault, almost even in some settings. But the reality is that I think that when you can approach things, again, finances, schedule, all these elements that go into building a successful project, being able to lay those out on a table, like I said with the VP at my high school, and saying, hey, here's the issues that we're dealing with, and again, focusing on the project, and then allowing those things to kind of flex, and then recognizing again that reminder that we're doing it for a different purpose. I'm not looking to just pad my pockets or line the pocketbooks of the family or, build a new house or whatever those things are. So it's about having a slightly quarter turn purpose towards your end goal, which in our case is, and it sounds countercultural to run a business not with profits directly in mind. But when you understand and support things like, infusing your products with spirit, and developing a feel for space, and trying to understand why people use space, understand that the kitchens we design are not just beautiful spaces with fine materials. They're also the home to the conversation about divorce, or the news that their daughter's being married, or there's so many more things. And so I've always said that what we do is very responsibility driven. We have a responsibility as designers, and especially as cabinet makers and furniture makers, that we're building characters inside people's homes that are going to reflect their life. Okay,
so that's interesting. So let me go back to I hear you speaking about your new business that you've really just set up now, which is custom millwork. Tell us more about that, right? You talk about not doing business, but not so much with profit in mind. Who does that?
Yeah, it sounds a little crazy, but here's the thing: is that so recently, and to kind of maybe to give you the Coles Note versions of my most recent career choices. So I was let go, and this. We've had coffee about this and stuff, but I was let go from a position that I was told I wasn't the right fit. And so it was a good job. I thought it was my dream job at the time. And so in reflecting on that, it was a terrible morning. But then understanding now, here we are, you know, what is almost 6 months later, I'm understanding that it was probably the best day of the year so far. Yeah, wow. And so, you know, I never could have
being let go was the best day of the year.
Well, so far to look at that as like, you know, yes, the terrible morning. It felt terrible to be blindsided. I wasn't expecting it, but to come away from that and understand that, again, this was a moment in time where I believe that God was just trying to message me and say, hey, man, you're not fulfilling your purpose. I've called you to more. You're doing greater things. And so at the time I was executing really beautiful projects. We were building really nice things for what was more or less privileged people on Vancouver Island. Sure. And so it's like, you know, I found myself in this, like, I'm finally doing all the best things in my career, but also kind of unrewarding and a little bit soulless in a way. And so having been canned from a position like that really wakes you up. And it made me sort of evaluate, well, you know what? I've tried so hard to fit into the mold that the world says, you know, has to be. And so instead, how can I make a new business that isn't the way I've done it in the past, that isn't going to be self-focused? It's not going to be like, I've run a company called Michael Ford Design in the past, where obviously naming it after yourself, you've got a little bit of pride into that, right? And so I didn't want this business, Pastor Millwork, to be reflective of who I am. And then I also wanted to learn from my experience with these bigger organizations. And so I immediately rolled that into the idea that we need to have a business with a different philosophy. And it needs to be more of a pastor's heart, in the sense that what we do for work really can be an extension of our faith. And there's no good reason why our faith needs to be confined to a worship service on a Sunday morning. And there's really no place on earth that a faith-based business should be more acceptable, because the reality is we live in a beautiful free country where that is one of the benefits of living here. And so I mean, we're 6 months in and things are going really well. In the sense that I've got regular steady income and things are, you know, flowing in. And I think a lot of that has to do with my experience, but even more so, I think that it's about opening the doors to new opportunities that otherwise I would have been maybe shunning.
Wow. So you mentioned it was the best day. Could have, in hindsight, could have been the best day. And I think about, you know, earlier on, you were talking about your faith and, you know, how that is always informed how you live your life, right? And then you said, well, being let go was perhaps God messaging me to say, hey, you need to come back and do the things that you need to do, right? And certainly I see that even in my own journey, right? That many a time where I go into a certain business, or I go into a certain deal, or I become involved in something, I know that this thing is bad when it falls through, like in a very blindsided way. It's almost like God saying, hey, dude, go back to factory settings. And so for you to have that experience, you know, really just brings the chills to me, right? To say, wow, you know, I'm a person of faith too, right? And to say, wow, God does speak to us, right? In so many ways. And maybe when we do not listen, it takes being let go to say, oh, oops, okay, I was supposed to be doing this. Right. So thank you for that insight, Mike. And folks, this is Voices Less Heard with Dr. PMak. And, you know, I, again, you know, bring in folks that, you know, on the outside, you think they're ordinary, but really they're doing extraordinary work. And so I want to speak with you about Skills BC and the work you're doing to raise the next generation of trades folks. How did you get into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, and again, back to this whole, I mean, this whole conversation exists because we understand God's timing.
Yeah.
And the reality is that, like what I said, that's the best day of the year. You know, about a year and a half, 2 years now ago, I started working with Skills BC. And so to just bring you up to speed, what I have been doing for them historically is this presentation called Inspire.
So let me just pause you a bit. So for someone who's listening right now and is like Skills BC, what's that?
Yeah,
what
totally.
Is Skills BC?
Totally. So what we do, generally speaking, so Skills Canada is the mother organization, and so that's a competition-based, not-for-profit organization here in Canada.
Okay.
The primary focus of that is to raise awareness and develop career paths for youth and young adults in the careers within trades and technology.
Sure. Okay.
Skilled trades and technology. And so we host at the provincial level, we host a provincial competition every year, as well as I think it's 13 regional competitions that allow students ranging from grade 6 all the way up into college age, before they go off to their careers.
Yeah.
And so we host, I think, it's 56 different provincial categories 56. For trades. Yeah. Wow. So you've got plumbing, electrical, you name it, hairstyling, baking, cooking, heavy equipment operating, landscaping, you name it. Every trade is covered. Cabinet making, I'd be
of course you
have to mention. Yep. So all these categories at the provincial level, every year on a single day, we have 600 youth compete. And so that's a massive event over in Abbotsford. We rent out TradeX, and it's a huge event. And that's really where you see industry, academia, competition, youth, education. Everybody comes together. We all set our professional roles at the door. Yeah. And then we come in and have a day of fun surrounded by, things like competitive spirit and things like that are involving our skills. And so it's a really good program. And then what we do throughout the year in leading up to that annual competition, and actually right now as we speak, is the national competition finals would be today. Okay. It's convenient. And so that's out in Quebec. And so we have our BC team there in Quebec now. Yep. And so they would come from that, and they'd ultimately be able to roll into the winners from there would roll into a world competition. And really those people are truly innovating the industries that they're a part of. They're going from those competitions directly into, good into the field, high level roles in the field, working for private organizations.
So what ages are we talking about?
So you'd be I guess in grade, you'd be somewhere around the 10, age 10 or 11,
12. Okay.
Right up until, 19, 20-year-olds. And then we obviously have a deep reach into some of the other demographics, things like people like mature students and stuff like that.
So how does this role speak to your younger self?
Oh, well, big time in the sense that really I see myself in many of these kids in the sense that, it's still to this day, I would say that the modern school system in North America, especially here on the island, is not necessarily catered to trades and technology, and still does focus primarily in the traditional education streams. Yeah. But that being said, having, what is probably 5,000 kids come from the entire province. Amazing. Yeah. 100 school buses full of kids show up on a single day and witness this. It's breathtaking to observe. There was a point in the day this past April at the competition provincially that I couldn't even move. I physically was stuck. And I thought to myself, next year we need better egress. Yeah. We need better fire, things. Because look at this crowd. It was crazy. And the passion you see on these kids' faces, especially the competitors. And not even just that, the level of skill that's coming out of these youth.
And innovation,
it's so much more advanced than it was when I went to school. Wow. And then even speaking from the generations that were before me, it's think about the available technology that these kids have. Yeah. And so the integration, it's less about willingness at this point. And I would say more about accommodating the wave of change that all of us don't have a choice.
Okay. So I did mention, and I didn't say age. My daughter is firstborn. And think, I want to be out there and make money, especially now where things are so expensive here in Canada. Is it a field that would pay well?
Oh, totally. I mean, the reality is that we've got, just speaking to BC, I think over the next few years, we're going to have about 1 million job vacancies due to retirement. That's just in trades and technology. And so you've got a massive vacuum being created with good jobs. Yeah. And then you've got, you know, on top of that, I would say pretty regularly at like a dinner party, the tradesperson in the room is now pretty consistently one of the highest paid people in the room. And that's just not just because they're skilled or because they're in demand. It's because the value of what they bring to the table is real. You know, and I think that the system's starting to recognize that, oh, well, you know what, even though this guy is, say, a plumber or is, say, a auto mechanic, that doesn't make him lesser value to our community. That's a good point. So there's, I think, historically just been a greater dollar value being put on things like academic careers. And so now that funding is shifting gears due to mandatory requirements, be it that our things are falling apart, it's just it's a natural evolution of you get increased pay. And so it's a very successful opportunity for a career.
That's good. That's good. So we're going to take a break. And when we come back, I want to be able to reflect with you. We are living in what I call a polycrisis, or it's known as a polycrisis, right? So we've got so many things happening around the world, wars, and look next door, the elections coming up, and, you know, some scary or not, depending on which, you know, perspective you take. So I want to pick up your brain and hear what your thoughts are.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to Voices Less Heard with Dr. PMak, and here I'm speaking with Michael Ford, a design extraordinaire who was working with Skills BC among many other endeavors. And before we went on the break, we were just talking about, you know, sort of the income that, you know, folks in the trades make, and perhaps even, you know, as we think about the youth, right, just encouraging them to even look at that as an option is certainly a conversation that I'd love for you to have with my kids too, like just, you know, go for coffee and, hey, go and chat with Uncle Mike and figure out what you what you want to do. And so we're speaking about now I was talking about the polycrisis and the things that are going on around the world. So, you know, there's, you know, the war that's happening in Israel, and, you know, Israel and Palestine. We've got floods happening just most recently, and then health issues, as you know, flu outbreak in the US that's potentially fatal to. What's your take on all of that? Like, do you see this as end times as a person of faith? Do you see that as we're living in interesting times?
It's definitely, I mean, it's interesting times for sure. And I think it's, I mean, watching the world's news can be terrifying. Right. And so it's like, it's one of those things. It's like, as we unfold what's happening around us and watching these bigger world stage things, it starts to, I mean, it's shocking. A lot of it comes across as very shocking. I would say my own personal take, I don't necessarily believe that we're in the end times. I think that this is the end times to a degree, in the sense that it's, you know, it's clear that the world is a dark place in some places. But it's also clear that there's a lot of light in the world too, right? So there's, you know, there where there's tragedy, there's opportunity for, you know, humanity to step up. And so, you know, some of these things that we talk about when we talk, you know, world stage, things like hunger are, you know, stuff that I start to watch and think about. And I think about our, even just locally, you know, being totally jaded to, you know, supply and demand being on Vancouver Island, you know, and being able to look at things like the global food as like as a thing. It's like, how are these issues still, you know, and those are the things that really, for me, like that's one in particular that I would say is a difficult one.
So even as you look at the world today, what, you know, as a husband, as a father, as an uncle, what is your biggest fear?
Well, I think one of my greatest fears is that we continue to push farther and farther apart globally. Subdividing ourselves, even saying that we're different than Americans, or we're different than, say, the Japanese culture or the Mexican culture, you name it, whatever that is. And so, like, my greatest fear is that as the world learns more about one another through technology and through things like our, webcams and whatever else, and we start to be less travel related and more, connected through screens. I think that's probably my biggest fear, is that we stop communicating in person and we stop, traveling globally and we stop things like global trade. Like, I believe in global trade. I believe that our industry, if I speak now back to the woodworking industry, we've got a huge forestry industry in Canada. We export a ton of goods. It's a massive development as far as our trades and technology goes. Is we have a huge industry there. And we service a lot of the rest of the world. That being said, we also service ourselves. And so as Canadians, we have an opportunity to participate a little bit more actively in what we build here. And that doesn't mean we don't export it, or it doesn't mean we don't do global trade. It doesn't mean that we stop importing products. I'm not by any means spouting patriotism. But what I am defining is that there is an opportunity where, when we're given, say, the choice of buying a local product versus one that's been imported just to save a buck, and if it is truly just to save a buck, then I want to urge people to not do that. Or maybe just reevaluate why. At the very least. The very, very least.
Spoken so well for a person coming from, it is, working with Skills BC, right? Because a lot of that is coming out of the trades, right? And so you want to make sure that there is enough dollars circulating around to support, folks that are working there.
100%. I mean, it is important that we continue to grow our GDP as a nation. It's important that we continue to develop our own technologies. We have the land of opportunity. And that really is true in Canada, is that, like, we're positioned. And then as soon as we develop these things, we should be making them more or less open source, so that the rest of the world can benefit.
Sure. I mean, so you've spoken about, a fear of that, we're using, the web technologies more, and we're not speaking in person. And so when you travel back into time, maybe into your younger years, into your teenage years, what would you do differently about that situation, about technology? I don't want to put things in your head like screen time or whatever. Like, what would you do differently?
Sure. I think I would maybe, like, have a little less pressure on getting done before, like a certain point in life. I think that a lot of kids these days are being told that they have to learn or have to grow up fast or have to define what they're going to be by a certain point.
This is why this conversation for me is very, very important, right? I told you about my background and growing in academia and this. And I sit here at my age now, I'm like, no. Right?
Yeah, totally. And that's just it, is that, like, what I think I would, couple things. One is, off the top, I would tell my younger self, I would say, hey man, it takes hard work and it takes time to master anything. But mastery is the reward, right? So it's not about finance. It's not about accolades. It's not about your name in bright lights. It's when you find yourself in a position mentally that you are confident that you've mastered that skill, no matter what it is, whether it's writing as an academic, whether it's, like, it could be playing professional baseball. There's a level at which you get to mastery. And when you achieve that and you understand it, and I mean really understand it, not just do a professional level mastery for the sake of profit, because when you understand it, you do things like start to give back. And so when I talk about my role with Skills BC and I talk about Pastor Millwork, they are both self-serving, because I make my income, I pay my mortgage with these things, but also they're community serving in the sense that I have two now methods. I have a not-for-profit method and I have a for-profit method that allows me two tools to exercise my mastery and demonstrate to people that we can get things done and we can develop community and we can build a brighter future. We can continue to inspire young minds. These are the things that we want to focus on. And so I would tell myself, master something, anything.
Okay.
You know, I would say that is important, and that it takes time to master it, no matter what it is.
It takes time, yeah.
And that's just an honest truth.
Yeah.
And so I would say pump the brakes.
Yeah.
Don't rush to say you have to define the rest of your life by 22. Don't rush to say you even have to define the rest of your life by 30. But understand that you're working towards the mastery of something, that's going to take time, whether you're doing it, you know, part-time or full-time, and that
it's going to be hard work.
It's going to be hard work. And that when you get there, the reward is in the mastery, not the accolades and not the output.
Yeah. I mean, those are great reflections. And I think about in the context of, you know, the Generation Z and Generation Alpha that's coming up now. I call it the instant generation, because they want things, you know, instant coffee, instant this, instant that. Is that a difficult message to not sell, but to give to the youth that you're working with? What's their reaction to it?
Well, I think it's funny because, you know, when I go to schools, part of my job with Skills BC is to speak to middle school students. And so I have a 1-hour presentation I give on trades and technology. And one of the points in that presentation, I wow them all with this video about a flying car. Yeah. And then they all get so excited about it, thinking like, I'm going to have that. I'm going to have that. But then I ask them, like, really, what do you think it took to get that? You know, there. And when you listen to the language of the guy in the video, it talks about how he always did it that way, or he grew up thinking this. And so again, it's this moment where they start to realize that they're at the beginning of something, and that it is going to be a process. And it's not as much as, you know, like I totally get what you're saying with the fact that all they want is instant gratification.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think there's like this inner desire against that, that it seems to be well received, because when I deliver these talks, it's like they can't get enough. You know, it's almost like it's what they're hearing in the general media tone is that you need it instantly. But then this is almost like a breath of fresh air, because it is real. It's a real, tangible piece of information that they can actually build upon. And so I feel like it's actually something they're kind of salivating for in a way.
That's really, really interesting, right? And so as you think about that, what do you then think is the future for, I mean, their future as well as the future of humanity, right? As we think about navigating all of these different crises that are happening around the world, and then also thinking about this instant gratification versus, hey, the real thing is going to take a lot of work.
That's right.
The real thing is you have to develop mastery in something. What do you think the future for humanity and for youth, particularly in BC, that you're working with?
I think it's positive for starters. I think we are headed in the right direction, at least here. You know, obviously I don't have a global perspective on that, but I can say that, like, there's things like, for example, solar technology. It's developing so fast right now. Wind technology. These are major ecological technologies that I'm hoping will change the face of how not only we get our energy, but also just how we think of humanity, right? This is like, instead of using our planet and using it, we are using our planet and, you know, and actually using it. And so there's like this benefit that comes through these things. And so I think that the future is bright, because there's more programs being rolled out, and because there's more funding coming our way, and there seems to be a ball that's starting, you know, this snowball effect that happens, that I would say, as it's starting to roll, what I'm noticing is there's more and more industries that are picking up on this. And so the recognition is coming. And so I would say the horizon is bright. But at the same time, like I said, it's going to be hard work, and, you know, it's going to take the change of our mindset. It will change our current generation to start thinking a little differently.
And what would you say, or what would you see success for them being like?
Well, I would love to see a world that's starting to actually heal itself, right? Things like carbon emissions, things like, you know, like actual world hunger. You know, like they're even seeing some peace in you know, in war-torn countries. They're like people settling even religious disputes. that can come together and say, well, we have a greater mission here, and that is to build humanity, which does include all of us, right? It's not exclusive. And so, so I think that there's definitely somewhere we're going with that. I think, do I think it's all flying cars and eco bubbles? No, probably not anytime soon. I think technology could get there. That's for sure. Maybe not in our lifetime.
Okay, great. Michael Ford, entrepreneur, businessman, husband, father, uncle, friend, mentor to many. Last question for you. And now I want to go into perhaps just a little bit of a philosophical question. The meaning of life. What is it? Right? So you spent an hour now just talking about the work that you've done. And then at the end of the day, for me, I'm trying to say, okay, this is life. What is life?
Honestly, for me, and I mean, I'm only halfway through, so I can only speak to the first half of life. But I do believe that life does contain two parts. It sort of has this part of life where you exist in your learning state. And then there's this other half of life where you exist in your knowing state. And for me, the meaning of my life is that daily, when I feel the sensation of the floor under my feet, when I step out of bed, it's just a reminder that He's breathed life, like real life and soul into us. We're greater than the collection of cells that we carry through the days. And so, for me, the meaning of life is not just about building new things, but also developing purpose and building communities that support one another and care for one another and be able to understand why happiness feels happy, and those sorts of things. And so, and ultimately understanding that we live in a real physical world, that systems and physicality of our world does need to support the spiritual life. So everything is spiritual, as mundane as it seems. It has a spiritual component to it. And so approaching literally everything through the lens of what does it do to your spirit is really the meaning of life to me. And when it comes down to it, the meaning of my life has meant that I've built a lot of cabinets. I've built some beautiful pieces of furniture. I've inspired people, hopefully, to do things like that. I've hopefully made spaces more peaceful. I'm really hoping I've made, a difference when it comes to the way people think about the value of design, the value of good design that is going to benefit people's lives day to day. And so those are the things that really, when I sum it all up, that's what helps me sleep at night. That's what allows me to go to bed without any anxiety. I'm able to park my anxieties on my faith, which is saying, you know what, God, I do believe wholeheartedly that you've put me here today to build more things, to develop more things, and to create the way you're a creator, right? And I'm doing that because God's a creator. God is a creator, and therefore I try my best to mimic who he was in my day-to-day life by creating.
And use the gifts that you mentioned, right? Use your gifts to help, make this world a beautiful place, right?
That's right.
One house at a time, one cabinet at a time, one school at a time.
That's right. And then not operating as though there's any one project better than the next. And so that's the other big underlying factor for me as I push forward. Even as of last week, I was doing this project last week and I was cursing. I should show you the text still is. I'm texting my wife saying, man, I should quit. This is terrible in all my years, that kind of thing. And she's like, you should quit, I can't believe you aren't that person. But at the same time, I finished, I muscled through, I found a good podcast and I got through it. And the reality was that I reminded myself at the end of that day that we have to love the labor. We have to love the hands-on. We have to be able to push through and persevere through those things, or we're not going to succeed at all of it, right? That is the resistance. Our resistance is our morning thought saying, that you're better than this, because you're not necessarily. What you are is you've been brought to this. And so let's knock it out of the park.
Thank you for listening to the Voices Listed podcast with Dr. PMak. I hope you enjoyed insights that came out of this conversation. Keep your notifications on. Our next episode will be dropping soon. Thank you and enjoy.